and enjoy your life after governor, because I don't think you'll be in elected politics.
Chris Bennett, a veteran host known for navigating high-stakes discussions, adjusted his headset. Tonight was more than just another broadcast. It was a direct challenge, a moment that had drawn significant attention.
$1 billion.
But it wasn't in 1 year, just to be clear.
In one report.
And it was in one report over multiple years, from 2015 to 2022.
So are you defending $71 billion in fraud, Peter?
Sounds
That's
like
a lot of money, far too much, and that's why this administration, why is the media so against cutting waste, fraud, and abuse from the government?
Yeah.
I don't get it.
I just want to ask
We won't be deterred.
You
We
know
will
why.
not be deterred from people like you and the press who are clearly adamantly opposed.
Across the table sat former President Donald Trump. His posture relaxed, but his focus sharp. His signature confidence was evident as he leaned slightly toward the microphone, prepared for the discussion ahead. Beside him, Karoline Leavitt, composed and prepared, glanced briefly at the notes in front of her. She didn't need them. She knew exactly what she wanted to say.
We are the federal law. Well, you better do it. You better do it, because you're not going to get any federal funding at all if you don't.
Beyond them, reporters from major media outlets, CNN, ABC News, The Washington Post, and others occupied the press row. Their notepads were open, recording devices at the ready. They weren't just observers, they were participants, prepared to challenge, dissect, and push back in what was expected to be a heated exchange, one that would unfold live in real time. Chris took a steady breath before speaking into the microphone. His voice, calm yet carrying the weight of the moment, filled the studio. Good evening, America. Welcome to American Pulse Live. If you're just tuning in, stay with us, because tonight's conversation is not one to miss. A few quiet chuckles came from the press section. Then Chris continued.
Elsewhere, so it doesn't lose so much. It's losing a tremendous amount of money.
Mr. President, some members of Congress in red districts are facing pushback from voters in town halls. We know that Americans voted for you on immigration and the economy, but these voters say they're angry and frustrated by these firings. They don't like the work of Elon Musk and these other actions. What do you say to them?
Who do you work for?
I work for ABC News, sir.
Who?
ABC News.
No wonder.
Joining us in the studio tonight, the 45th President of the United States, Donald J. Trump, and former White House Press Secretary Karoline Leavitt. And of course, we're joined by members of the press, representatives from major news outlets who will have the opportunity to ask their questions directly. But first, let's address the issue at hand. Mr. President, you've stated that states failing to comply with federal law on transgender athletes will face consequences. What happens if a governor refuses to enforce your policy? Trump's response was immediate and unwavering. Well, we are the federal law. A ripple of reaction moved through the room. Some journalists blinked, others scribbled furiously. Chris held up a hand, signaling for the discussion to continue.
Right now complaining about what they say is the chainsaw approach and saying that it's been done very sloppily, the cuts to jobs and spending. How do you respond to that criticism?
I love this.
I love how the media takes a few critics when the overwhelming response from the American people is support for what this administration is doing. If you look at the public polling, 70% of Americans, according to CBS, believe that President Trump is delivering on the promises he made. And there should be no secret about the fact that this administration is committed to cutting waste, fraud, and abuse. The president campaigned on that promise. Americans elected him on that promise, and he's actually delivering on it. And this is something that Democrats promised they would do for decades. President Trump is just the first president to get it.
Clarify that for us, sir. Trump's gaze remained firm. Well, they better do it. Chris leaned in slightly. And if they don't, Trump's voice stayed steady, casual yet firm. They won't get any federal funding at all. A hushed tension settled over the studio. From the press row, Sarah Collins of CNN reacted first. So, to be clear, any state refusing to comply loses its federal funding entirely? Trump nodded, his tone matter of fact. Every last cent. Chris glanced toward the press section, already expecting the next challenge. Mike Reynolds of ABC News pressed his mic. And what happens to those governors, politically speaking?
I mean, the women, if you watch the Olympics, You had two transitioned people that were fighting in the women's boxing. They have women's boxing category, and if you saw that,
makes sense.
It was brutal. What happened to the Italian woman was a really good boxer. After one punch, she said, no more. I've never been hit. It was a left. It was not even it was just a left jab. She got hit so hard, she said, I can't do it. They forced her to go out. No, go out again. You'll do it.
Trump exhaled sharply, as if the answer was obvious. Then, with a smirk, he responded, well, enjoy your life after governor, because I don't think you'll be in elected politics much longer. The room went silent for a moment, then hushed but frantic murmurs erupted among reporters, pens flying across pages, fingers tapping at keyboards. Just as Chris was about to steer the conversation forward, another reporter's voice cut through. Chris turned toward the new voice, giving a slight nod. Go ahead, let's hear it. The conversation was far from over. The studio remained charged, the debate shifting from states defying federal law to a broader ideological battle.
And it turned out he was very easy to get approved. You know, I was not sure. He's a tough guy, strong guy. He has his opinions, and I wasn't sure. He turned out to be he went very smoothly. I don't know if he's in the room now. He's going to be in the room very shortly. Where is he? Oh, good. I'm saying the right thing. I can't speak too badly about him. I better be careful.
Chris Bennett, a seasoned host, anticipated the next turn in discussion. Adjusting his mic, he turned to Donald Trump, who remained unfazed. Mr. President, Chris began, his voice measured, we've talked about states that don't comply. Now let's talk about the policies themselves. There's been backlash on both sides regarding men competing in women's sports. You've been vocal about this. Why? Trump straightened slightly, hands on the table. His response was immediate. Because it's unfair. Because everyone knows it.
Turned over evidence of fraud to the Justice Department, and when should we expect to see those indictments?
It's a clever question. First of all, I think all Americans would agree that funding mastectomies in Mozambique is not something that the American people should be funding, or DEI programs. I think it's fraudulent that the American government has been ripping off taxpayers in this way. And we also do know there has been extensive fraud, particularly if you look at Social Security. In fact, according to an IG report from the Social Security Administration, there was $71 billion worth of fraud in one single fiscal year that we know about. And so
elsewhere, so it doesn't lose so much. It's losing a tremendous amount of money.
Some members of Congress in red districts are facing pushback from voters in town halls. We know that Americans voted for you on immigration and the economy, but these voters say they're angry and frustrated by these firings. They don't like the work of Elon Musk and these other actions. What do you say to them?
Who do you work for?
I work for ABC News, sir.
Who?
ABC News.
No wonder.
A few murmurs rippled through the press row, but Trump continued. There was a women's weightlifting record that stood for 19 years. Then a competitor who transitioned shattered it by 100 pounds. Chris leaned in slightly. And you believe that? Trump cut him off. I know that, and so does anyone paying attention. From the press section, Rebecca Langston of the Washington Post spoke up. Mr. Trump, some argue these athletes are competing as their true selves, following medical and legal processes to transition. Shouldn't they be respected for that? Trump exhaled sharply, shaking his head. Rebecca, this isn't about feelings. It's about biology. You can change your name and pronouns, but you can't change reality. A 6'2", 220-pound biological male competing against women isn't fair. It's a problem. Chris turned to Karoline Leavitt. Karoline, any thoughts? Leavitt nodded, turning toward the press. This isn't about respect or identity. It's about fairness. Women train their whole lives only to have their dreams taken away. Scholarships, titles, records gone. And the worst part, the same people who claim to fight for women's rights are silent. A slight pause settled over the room. Then Mike Reynolds of ABC leaned forward. Mr. President, are you saying there's no way to make this fair? What about regulations, weight classes, hormone requirements? Trump scoffed. You can regulate it all you want, Mike. At the end of the day, if you put a biological male in competition with biological females, he wins every time. That's just science. Chris shifted in his chair. And your solution? Trump didn't hesitate. Ban it completely, no exceptions. The press pool didn't look surprised, but they weren't backing down. Sarah Collins of CNN spoke up. So if a state refuses to ban it, if a governor disagrees? Trump leaned forward, voice lower but firm. Then they lose their federal funding. Chris exhaled slowly, scanning the room. The tension was undeniable. This wasn't just another policy debate, it was a defining moment. The discussion on transgender athletes had sparked a fierce exchange, but Trump wasn't finished. Chris adjusted his posture, fingers brushing his notes. Mr. President, you've made it clear this ban is necessary to protect women's sports, but some argue it's too extreme, that fairness can be ensured without full exclusion. Is there any middle ground? Trump shook his head without hesitation. Number. The only way to solve this is a complete ban. If we don't, it only gets worse. He leaned toward the microphone, voice firm. Look at reality. We put the ban in place to protect women. In the Olympics, 2 transitioned athletes competed in women's boxing. It was brutal. The room remained silent, waiting for him to continue. There was an Italian female boxer, a real female boxer, who had trained her entire life for that moment. She faced a transgender opponent. One punch, and she immediately backed away. She had never been hit like that before. Chris raised an eyebrow. Are you saying she quit after just one punch? Trump nodded. A simple left jab, Chris, not even a hard punch. But it was enough for her to say, I can't do this. From the press section, Sarah Collins from CNN pressed her mic button. Mr. Trump, that might be one isolated case. Are you saying no female boxer can compete fairly? Trump let out a small chuckle, though his expression remained serious. Sarah, they forced her back in. They told her, go back out. You'll be fine. And guess what? She got hit again. This time she went down immediately. She said, no, that's it. She didn't want to risk her life in the ring. That's reality. A brief silence filled the studio. Chris leaned forward, voice measured. Mr. President, it sounds like you're saying policymakers are ignoring reality. Trump let out a dry laugh. Chris, they're not just ignoring it, they're pretending it doesn't exist. They know the advantage is undeniable, yet they push women into unwinnable situations. And when the truth becomes too obvious, they say nothing. Karoline Leavitt, who had been quietly listening, nodded in agreement. Trump leaned forward, his voice unwavering. What frustrates me the most is that these same people always talk about protecting women. But when a female athlete gets knocked out by a transgender competitor, they go silent. Chris slowly nodded, turning back to the press. All right, does anyone want to challenge that? Mike Reynolds, ABC News, raised his hand. Mr. President, isn't this just one example? If the sport had clearer regulations? Trump cut him off, his gaze sharp. Mike, how many examples do you need? How many female athletes need to walk away in pain? How many records, titles, and scholarships have to be taken before you admit this is a real problem? Silence. Chris crossed his arms, exhaling. Your stance is clear, but the bigger question is, who will fix this? Trump leaned back, voice steady. We will, and those who try to stand in the way are about to realize America has changed. Chris scanned the room. No frantic typing, no paper shuffling. Everyone was waiting to see what would happen next. The tension wasn't just inside the studio. It stretched across state lines, reaching the office of Maine's Governor Ethan Carter, who was now joining live via phone. Chris adjusted his headset. The faint crackle of the call fed through the speakers. Well, ladies and gentlemen, this conversation is about to get even more interesting. Joining us now live is Governor Ethan Carter of Maine. A slight pause. Then the governor's voice came through, calm but firm. Good evening, Chris. I appreciate the opportunity to respond. Chris exchanged a glance with Trump, who looked unfazed, as if he had expected this all along. Mr. President, Chris continued, it seems you've got the governor's attention. Go ahead. Trump didn't hesitate. Governor Carter, let's get straight to it. Will you comply with this policy? A brief pause. Then Carter's voice remained neutral. My administration follows all state and federal laws currently in effect. Trump smirked, shaking his head. Well, we are the federal law. The room fell silent. The weight of that statement settled over the broadcast. Chris leaned in. Governor, do you care to respond? Carter didn't hesitate. I respect the president's authority, but my duty is to the people of Maine, not political pressure. My administration will make decisions based on what is best for our state. Trump's voice sharpened. Then you better do it. Silence. Because if you don't, Maine won't be seeing any federal funding. A brief crackle on the line. Carter remained measured. With all due respect, Mr. President, I don't respond to ultimatums. Trump chuckled. Oh, this isn't an ultimatum, Governor. This is reality. He paused, delivering his next words deliberately. And by the way, your people, even though they lean liberal, they don't want men playing in women's sports. Chris turned to the press, watching as reporters absorbed the moment. So, Governor, do you believe your citizens actually support transgender athletes in women's competitions? Carter exhaled. I believe my citizens expect fairness, and fairness means upholding laws that reflect our state's values. Trump nodded. Then you'll have a decision to make. A few seconds passed. Then Carter spoke. Chris, I think I've made my position clear. Trump, still seated but focused, leaned into his mic. Let me make something very clear. Just like we've told our Russian counterparts, his voice was deliberate, controlled. This administration is focused on stopping the fighting and moving forward. We can spend all day arguing about the past, but that won't change the future. A brief pause. Then, chaos. Two reporters spoke over each other, their voices clashing. Chris Bennett raised a hand to regain control, but before he could, Karoline Leavitt stepped in. Reagan! Her voice cut through the noise. She pointed at a journalist. I just called on Reagan. Go ahead. The room hesitated. Another voice tried pushing through. Deanna from CNN. Karoline whipped around, her expression sharp. Not now, Deanna. A few stunned looks. Some reporters shifted uncomfortably. Others glanced toward Chris, waiting for his reaction. He simply leaned back, letting the moment unfold. Karoline folded her arms, taking a beat before speaking again, calm but firm. I'm taking control here. Silence. The room adjusted, realizing she wouldn't be talked over. From the side, Trump smirked, leaning into his mic. She's good, isn't she? Chris Bennett chuckled, nodding. Well, you heard her. Reagan, go ahead. The room reset. The message was clear. Karoline Leavitt was in charge. A hush fell, not out of respect, but acceptance. The reporters, usually quick with follow-ups, hovered over their keyboards, searching for the right angle. But what could they write? That they had been outmaneuvered again? Trump leaned back, the smirk lingering. He had seen this before, that moment when the press realized they had lost control of the room. Karoline stood tall, unreadable, but her stance said everything. She knew. Chris finally cleared his throat, glancing at the clock. Well, I think that about wraps it up. The cameras kept rolling, the world still watching, but the battle was over. Outside the studio, the city buzzed, oblivious to what had just unfolded. Headlines were being typed, tweets drafted, but none of it could change reality. The press had come prepared to challenge Trump. Instead, they had witnessed a display of control and strategy. As the lights dimmed and the microphones clicked off, one truth remained undeniable. Now I want to hear from you. Was this a turning point, a masterclass in handling the media, or just another day in politics? Let me know your thoughts in the comments below. And if you want more in-depth coverage like this, don't forget to like, subscribe, and turn on notifications so you never miss an update. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you next time.